Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. Now, I've talked recently about my belief that a credible endgame for Reform UK could be merging with the Conservative Party and building a political party that is further to the right of the current Tory party. Now, I say this because it's exactly what happened in Canada under very similar circumstances, but I don't know that Farage is actively planning it. However, a Twitter post from a high-profile defector to Reform UK has got me intrigued again. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So, Rael Braverman, who's Suella Braverman's husband, recently defected from the Conservative Party to Reform UK. Now, this has obviously intensified speculation that Suella Braverman will defect herself at some point, and I don't think she's categorically ruled it out. In reality, I think she's probably waiting to see what happens. She's not going to join them if it means losing the next election. She becomes properly irrelevant then. She won't win as a Reform candidate in her current seat. It's far too Conservative. But if she thinks Reform are in line for some safe seats at the next election and that she will be given one, then yeah, she'll be much happier as a Reform MP than a Conservative one now that her leadership ambitions are in tatters. But anyway, never mind her. It's her husband who got me interested today. So he tweeted this: Reform UK must not merge with any party. Agree? Notes that must not was in block capital, so trying to create a forceful statement. One notable respondent was Alison Pearson, now a well-known Tory client journalist for a range of newspapers. She said that it may be inevitable, to which Braverman replied that Reform can win with no pact. The Uniparty is dying a slow, painful death. Now, if you're not familiar with this uniparty term, as I understand it's an American term, used to describe policies that are shared with the two big parties, Democrats and Republicans, which are not considered by the people using the term to be in the public interest. I mean, gun laws, I guess, would be one obvious policy, although I doubt that's what Braverman has in mind. Clearly, he's using the term about the Tories and Labour in the UK. A lot of extremists do that. Now, I want to pick up on something that both he and Pearson said in their little exchange, but I want to consider like the bigger picture here first. Why is Rael Braverman getting so worked up about a merger? It's true, you do get the odd article in the mainstream media talking about the prospect now and then. That is because, as Pearson alludes to, look at it logically, the right-wing vote is split. This is a relatively new concept. For most of the last 100 years, never happened. The left-wing vote started splitting long before the right, leaving even obviously incompetent Tory leaders able to win elections. If the right wing want their old advantage back, they can't afford to split their vote under the current system. And the most influential commentators on that side don't want to reform the electoral system because they can kiss goodbye to having a large majority based on a narrow policy interest ever again. I mean, you could have a moderate Conservative government in coalition with others. You couldn't have a very right-wing one. So with that reality in mind, one of the four things has to logically happen. First, Reform UK has to collapse into oblivion. Second, the Conservative Party has to be completely destroyed. Third, the Labour Party has to be completely destroyed with no single party collecting the vast majority of their votes. They won't care if those votes get spread to other parties because first past the post. Or fourth, Reform UK and the Conservatives will have to come to some sort of arrangement. Now, whether that arrangement be a formal merger or just an electoral pact, there would have to be something. This has always seemed the most likely to me because it's clearly the path of least resistance, and it happened under pretty much the same circumstances in Canada in the 1990s, a formal merger. Took some time, didn't happen straight away, did take a few years, but that's where it went. But Braverman clearly doesn't want that. But why make a fuss about it? Like I say, the issue pops up now and then, but I was checking to see if anything's been written. I've checked through the usual Tory client media outlets, the main ones anyway. I've not seen any real discussion going on right now. It's certainly not a major talking point. So why rail against it if the media aren't particularly pushing it? Has he found something out? He's a high-profile defector to Reform UK. Has he been involved in some sensitive discussions with the leaders, little drinky-do or something? And has he heard something which makes him think that Reform UK strategy is ultimately based on an agreement with the Tories? Because not only did he say no merger, but no pact. Now, the two are different arrangements. Now, I will just point out, there is a sense in which he's right that Reform UK do not win with a pact that brings them too close to the Conservatives. a lot of Conservatives will openly talk as if the Reform and the Conservative vote can just be unified and that's all there is to it. No. I've said before, there are lots of moderate Conservatives. We know this from polling. There are lots of moderate Conservatives who did still vote Tory last year out of habit and a belief that Labour are worse, but they won't vote for Reform UK or Farage. Similarly, there are Reform voters who are absolutely not Tories. A bit like some core MAGA voters in America. They just don't realise that Trump was worse than the Republican establishment. And over here, they don't realise that Farage is a classic Tory. Absolutely no difference between Farage and Rees-Mogg, other than you don't see Rees-Mogg cosplaying people he's pretending to side with. His Undertaker costume suits all occasions. And if the two parties stood down candidates for one another, that might cause core support for both parties to stay away. So you'd have to be a bit cunning. Maybe do what Labour and the Lib Dems did. You just don't waste money targeting seats you've got no chance in, but the other can win, because that makes sense even without an arrangement. But would that work for the Conservatives and Reform UK, given that in quite a lot of seats, Conservatives and Reform UK are directly challenging one another? Labour don't really challenge Lib Dems anywhere. One seat in Sheffield. Now, you would think, not for the next election. This wouldn't be an imminent thing. The polling now is awkward, but as Professor Curtis was pointing out, it's a reflection of the fact the public can't see the difference between Labour and Power. There's no end of people going, oh, what's the difference between Labour and the Conservatives? And members of the public are going, yeah, I don't actually feel any different. Don't feel any different. We've still got all the doom and gloom in the news. What's the difference? Well, of course, there's no difference yet. The budget hasn't even been implemented. The first round of legislation is still passing through Parliament. So Labour have got no laws on the books, apart from privatising rail companies, and no budget until like April. But it will come before the election. Labour are facing headwinds, yeah, especially regarding Trump, but they've got a lot of agency over how the voters see them at the next election. Conservatives don't. I mean, I can appreciate that unless the Tories really sort themselves out pretty quickly, there's going to be absolutely no value in Reform working with them for the next election, even behind the scenes. Why would you? What's the point? Better to try and win a larger share of the vote and significantly more seats, as the Canada Reform Party did, and then be in a stronger position to deal with the Conservatives after, maybe 10 years. After which, remember, Labour, even if they achieve their aims, if they achieve their decade of renewal, it all goes swimmingly, there will be diminishing returns on the gains. People are going, oh, they've run out of ideas. Simply because once you've fixed the bare bones, everything you do after that is sort of like gravy. It's like, it's better, but is it much better? After the banking crisis, for example, if we go back to the last Labour government with Gordon Brown in charge, who I respected as Prime Minister but was a shite campaigner. Imagine if he'd been facing off against Cameron's Tories, but also a Farage-led UKIP, which was in the position Reform UK is in now. Brown would have won that election. In other words, although Labour are worried about votes being lost to Reform UK, and some Labour MPs are panicking about completely the wrong things, Farage is still net useful to their election chances. He will almost certainly gain them more seats than he cost them. So Pearson is almost certainly right. In some form or other, a pact may be inevitable. Indeed, right now, it's hard to see how Reform win power without one, or even how the Tories win power without one. This concept of Braverman's that Labour and the Conservatives are dying, it's not really real. The vote is much more fragmented, absolutely, and it's been going that way for a long time. Absolutely true. But that just means that it's possible for parties on the fringes to be successful in the short term. But only in the short term, not long term. If Reform UK don't maintain their current polling into the next election, or if they do rather, let's focus on the fact. So let's say Reform UK actually go into the next election on roughly 25% of the vote. Don't think it's really likely. Then that could make it impossible for the right wing to ever win again. There are just so many things which make me think of Reform UK as actively wanting, not that they'll find themselves in that position in 10 years' time, but they're actively working towards forcing the Tories into a merger which drags them permanently further to the right. First, there is no logical path to power for Reform UK that sets them in competition with the Tories. They need the Tories to actually be destroyed. How realistic is that? Not very. Second, Farage was very reluctant to turn Reform UK into a real political party. Then he said he would. Oh yeah, I'll sell me shares. And now I'm looking at it and thinking, well, this is 6 months later and I'm not really seeing any movement there. You've still got your shares, haven't you? If he had a long-term vision for the party, he would obviously have to establish a proper political party with all the infrastructure, because he can't do it all himself. And in 10 years' time, he'll be like 70. Third, it's what happened in Canada. So there is already precedent. And now, fourth, a Reform UK defector, who must be in constant contact with the leadership, seems to think he has to rally people in opposition of the idea of an eventual merger. Why? It's impossible if Farage, the literal owner of the party, is against it. Has he heard that Farage isn't against it? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.